What Michael Strahan didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly grasp from the comfortable bubble of morning show success he lived in, was that Denzel Washington was not the sort of guest who responded well to an unprepared interviewer. Strahan had become accustomed to breezy conversations, to lightweight celebrity chatter, to guests who laughed politely at his jokes and helped carry the segment even when the questions were shallow. But Denzel Washington had been doing interviews long before Strahan ever played his first professional football game. He had sat across from some of the most respected journalists in the world, engaging in conversations that explored craft, discipline, faith, responsibility, and the art of storytelling. He had spoken with people who took their work as seriously as he took his. And after decades in the spotlight, Denzel could tell within the first 30 seconds whether the person sitting across from him had done the bare minimum or had actually prepared. And Michael Strahan, in that moment, had very clearly not prepared. The studio audience filed in with visible excitement, the kind of electricity that runs through a room when people know they are in the presence of someone iconic. Many of them had grown up watching Denzel's films, quoting his lines, feeling moved or inspired or transformed by performances that had shaped entire generations. They weren't just fans, they were admirers, students of his work, people who respected the depth and intentionality he brought to each role. They took their seats with eager anticipation, silencing their phones, straightening their clothes, whispering to the friends or partners they came with. They were ready to witness a meaningful conversation between two accomplished men, one a celebrated actor with a legendary career, the other a beloved television personality with charisma to spare. At least, that's what they expected. Behind the scenes, the usual pre-show dance unfolded. Makeup artists dabbed at powder and adjusted collars. Stage managers moved briskly across the floor with headsets pressed to their ears. Sound engineers made their final checks, flipping switches and murmuring confirmations. Camera operators positioned their lenses just right, prepared to capture every expression, every reaction, every micro-moment that daytime audiences adored. Everything was ready. Everything was polished. Everything was in place. Everything except, as it would soon become painfully clear, the host himself. When Denzel finally walked onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause. He moved with the effortless grace that had defined his public image for decades, offering a warm wave and a genuine smile. At 68, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that didn't need to be announced. His suit was impeccable, simple, elegant, tailored to perfection. His posture, calm yet authoritative, conveyed a man who had earned every ounce of respect the world had given him. Michael Strahan rose from his chair with that famous wide smile, extending his hand with enthusiasm. He gestured toward the guest seat with the ease of someone who believed the upcoming conversation would unfold smoothly, like all the others. They exchanged pleasantries, light remarks that prompted polite laughter from the audience. Everything seemed perfectly normal, but beneath the surface, something was about to go wrong. Very, very wrong. The cameras rolled, the lights brightened, the segment officially began. And within the first half-minute, anyone truly paying attention could sense the tension tightening in the air, as though the interview had already stepped onto dangerous ground. So Denzel Strahan began, leaning back casually in his chair, that practiced TV smile glued in place. "I gotta ask you about this new movie of yours. Another drama, another serious role. Don't you ever get tired of playing the same type of character over and over again?" The question hovered in the air like a spark in a room filled with gasoline. To a casual viewer, it might have sounded harmless, perhaps even playful, but anyone familiar with Denzel Washington's career, anyone who had taken the time to look beyond the surface, would immediately recognize the problem. The question didn't just oversimplify Denzel's 4 decades of work. It revealed, unmistakably, that Strahan had not done even 10 minutes of research. The studio audience sensed it instantly, a subtle shift, a quiet inhale, a collective tightening in posture, as if everyone had suddenly realized they were witnessing something they weren't supposed to. Denzel's expression changed almost imperceptibly, but it changed. His eyebrows lifted by no more than a millimeter, his lips pressed together in a polite but unmistakably controlled manner. He'd sat through thousands of interviews over the course of his career. He'd handled awkward questions, misguided questions, provocative questions, even downright disrespectful ones. He'd learned how to respond without responding, how to correct someone gracefully, how to maintain dignity even when those around him didn't. But something about the way Strahan framed this question, so casually dismissive, so reductive, so clearly uninformed, hit a nerve. It wasn't the question itself. It was what the question revealed. It revealed that Strahan didn't understand the craft. It revealed that he didn't appreciate the range. It revealed that he didn't grasp the discipline, the study, the depth required for the roles Denzel chose deliberately and carefully. Most of all, it revealed that Strahan was treating a master of his profession like a guest on autopilot. Denzel shifted ever so slightly in his chair, leaning forward just a bit. The studio seemed to tilt with him, the energy thickened, even Strahan's smile falter, only for a moment, but long enough for the trained eye to catch, long enough for the audience to feel that something monumental was about to unfold. And that was the moment, the exact instant, when the interview took a turn that no one on the production team had anticipated. Joy leaned back in her chair, arms loosely folded, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I call it suspicious," she declared, the satisfaction in her voice unmistakable. She looked as though she had just scored a point in a game only she understood. Innocent people don't usually react this way to simple questions. Simple questions, Cliff repeated, his voice rising despite his efforts to hold himself together. Every sentence in the last 10 minutes had chipped away at his composure, and now the cracks were vividly visible. "You've spent this entire interview implying I'm some kind of criminal. You practically accused me of using charity work as a front for misconduct. You've suggested my faith is fake, my book is dishonest, my life is a facade, and you have the audacity to call those simple questions." Sarah Haynes, the show's moderator, instinctively leaned forward, her expression tense and her voice softening like someone trying to defuse a live explosive. "Why don't we shift gears?" she suggested gently. "Maybe we could talk about your upcoming tour, or the new music you've been working on." But Cliff wasn't listening. His gaze remained locked on Joy, unwavering, as though she were the only person in the room. "No," he said, his tone firm and controlled in a way that hinted at danger. "We're going to finish this conversation, because this," he gestured sharply toward Joy, "is exactly what's wrong with modern media. People like her think they can destroy someone's reputation based on nothing more than their own prejudices and assumptions. They build a narrative first and then twist everything, facts, timelines, statements, to fit it." Joy actually laughed. The sound was sharp, metallic, almost theatrical. It echoed through the suddenly hushed studio. Her smile grew wider, colder. "Oh, this is rich," she said, shaking her head slowly. "And now I'm the villain because I asked some tough questions. Please, this is exactly why victims stay silent. Because powerful men like you twist everything until you're the ones who look hurt, while everyone else is painted as manipulative or dishonest." "Victims," Cliff repeated. The word struck something deep inside him. His control wavered completely. "You want to talk about victims? Then let's talk about victims." The studio was so quiet that even Cliff's unsteady breathing sounded loud. "Victims are the children I've spent my career trying to help," he said, voice trembling not with fear, but with outrage. "Real children, real problems, real change. Victims are the fans who have been confused, heartbroken, and misled by malicious rumors spread by people who don't care about truth, only about drama. Victims are innocent people whose lives are ripped apart by baseless accusations while spectators cheer." Assuming that smoke must mean fire, his hand clenched on the armrest. He looked as though he were holding onto the last thread of restraint. Across from him, Joy sat back with a slow, satisfied exhale, the kind one makes after successfully setting a trap. Her smile had the unmistakable air of someone who believed she had just extracted exactly the reaction she wanted, the kind she could later package, clip, and frame as evidence. "Are you finished with your little tantrum?" she asked coolly. The word tantrum landed like a spark in a room full of dry tinder. Something in Cliff snapped, not loudly, not visibly, but with the quiet finality of a bridge burning. His face went pale, jaw tightening, eyes narrowing with an intensity that made even the camera operators glance at each other uneasily. And when he spoke, his voice was not loud. It was deadly soft, the kind of quiet that carries more threat than shouting ever could. Tantrum, he whispered. The entire studio leaned in to hear him. You think this is a tantrum? He paused for a moment, breathing in deeply, as if forcing the words out with careful precision. This is what happens when a decent person, someone who has spent 60 years trying to do good, finally stands up to a bully who thinks tearing others down is entertainment. For the first time, Joy's smirk faltered. It was brief, just a flicker, but unmistakable. Still, she quickly recomposed herself. Bully, I'm a journalist, she insisted. I'm asking legitimate questions. Cliff laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was hollow, bitter, edged with disbelief. The sound echoed through the silent studio like the crack of glass. Is that what you call yourself, a journalist? He asked. Real journalists deal in facts, not character assassination. Real journalists investigate instead of assuming. Real journalists don't take someone who has been thoroughly examined, publicly cleared, and officially exonerated, and continue to imply guilt because it makes for a more dramatic show. I've done my research, Joy shot back, but for the first time, uncertainty crept into her tone. I know about the allegations, the investigation, the settlement. Cliff interrupted, his voice rising sharply. What settlement? There was no settlement because there was no case. The words reverberated through the studio like a strike of thunder. His voice dropped again to that same dangerous whisper. And you know that, he said, you know the truth. You just don't care. The cameras kept rolling. No one moved. No one dared breathe too loudly. The interview, which had started as a routine promotional appearance, had spiraled into a raw, explosive confrontation, one that none of them would soon forget. I'm sorry, Denzel said at last, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of tension, like a taut string pulled just shy of snapping. Anyone who was truly paying attention could hear it, could feel the temperature in the room change by a few quiet degrees. What do you mean by that? Strahan chuckled, still oblivious, still high on the comfort of his usual morning show rhythm. He didn't hear the shift. He didn't feel the weight in Denzel's tone. The warning signs were there flashing, really, but Strahan walked straight past them with the confidence of a man who had no idea he was stepping into a minefield. Come on, man, he said, waving a hand dismissively. You know what I mean? The serious guy, the mentor figure, the wise man who gives the big speeches. It's like you're stuck in this box, you know. When's the last time we saw you do something fun, something light? The words dropped into the air like stones thrown into a still pond, sending shockwaves through the room. The audience shifted. People frowned, whispered. A few exchanged glances that said, he didn't just say that, did he? Behind the cameras, producers straightened in their seats, eyes widening with a mixture of dread and disbelief. Because what Strahan had just done, whether he realized it or not, was minimize one of the most versatile, acclaimed, and decorated acting careers in modern history to a single oversimplified stereotype. It wasn't merely inaccurate, it was disrespectful. Denzel didn't react immediately. He sat back, his hands clasped together in a slow, deliberate motion, the kind that communicated restraint rather than ease. The camera zoomed in slightly, capturing the subtle but absolute shift in his posture. The warmth he had entered the stage with, the relaxed shoulders, the easy smile, was gone. In its place was something cooler. Sharper, alert, Michael, he said, and the way he said the name carried a weight Strahan completely missed. I've done comedies, I've done action films, I've done Shakespeare on stage. If you actually looked at my body of work, you'd see quite a range. It was gentle. It was polite. It was a correction dressed in velvet. A smart host, a prepared host, would have backed up, nodded respectfully, redirected. They would have read Denzel's tone, recognized the lifeline he was offering, and taken it. But Michael Strahan was not that host. Yeah, but come on, he persisted, leaning in as if he was clarifying some unavoidable truth instead of digging himself into a crater. Most people know you for the same type of role. Training Day, Man on Fire, The Equalizer. It's all the same energy, isn't it? The reaction from the audience was instantaneous. A ripple of murmurs moved through the rows. You could practically hear the winces. These were people who knew Denzel's work, who loved him, studied him, admired him. They were the wrong audience for Strahan's oversimplifications, and they knew a bad moment when they saw one. Behind the cameras, one of the producers mouthed, "Oh no." Another pressed both hands to his forehead. But the segment couldn't cut away. There was no commercial break scheduled. The cameras had to keep rolling as the room slid further into tension. Denzel leaned forward. It was subtle, it was small, but anyone who had watched him over the years, anyone familiar with his interviews, his presence, his ability to command a room with a shift as small as a breath, knew this gesture. When Denzel Washington leaned forward when he got quiet, something was about to happen. "Michael," he repeated, his voice now controlled with razor precision, "have you actually watched my films? Because what you're describing doesn't sound like someone who's familiar with my actual work." The air tightened. Several people in the audience inhaled sharply. Even those who didn't fully grasp the nuance could sense that the ground had begun to shake. Strahan laughed. He laughed. Not out of malice, not to be cruel, but with the misplaced confidence of someone who genuinely believed he still had control over a conversation that was slipping through his fingers like water. "Of course, I've watched your movies," he said, waving the criticism away with a grin that was suddenly starting to look less charming and more naive. "I've seen a bunch of them. I'm just saying, you've got a vibe." "A vibe," Denzel repeated, and this time the words were not a question but a verdict. He leaned back again, but not the relaxed, open lean from before. This was different. This was the lean of a man recalibrating his patience. His expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened, focusing on Strahan with an intensity that made several audience members physically shift backward in their seats. "You're reducing a 40-year career to a vibe," he said slowly, carefully. "Do you understand how dismissive that is, how uninformed?" Strahan blinked. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. But instead of pulling back, he pushed forward, doubling down. "I'm not trying to be disrespectful," he insisted. "I'm just saying what people think." Denzel gave a short, humorless laugh, one that carried no amusement whatsoever. "What people?" he asked. "People who have watched 3 of my movies. People who only know the ones where I'm holding a gun. People who never saw Fences, Flight, The Preacher's Wife, Philadelphia, Much Ado About Nothing, Glory, Remember the Titans, Malcolm X. Should I go on?" The list hit the room like thunder. Strahan tried to interrupt, but Denzel held up a hand, not aggressively, but with the authority of a man who had earned the right to finish his sentence. "You don't get to tell an actor what his range is," Denzel said. "Not when you haven't done your homework. Not when you're sitting across from him unprepared." The audience exploded into applause. Not the fun, cheerful morning show applause, but the sharp, grateful applause of people watching someone finally set a boundary. Strahan swallowed, his smile faltering. It was only then, finally, that he understood he was no longer hosting a routine segment. He was being corrected, he was being educated, and he was being done so by one of the greatest actors alive, on live television, with nowhere to hide. He waved his hand dismissively, as if Denzel's concern was nothing more than artistic ego or unnecessary professional pride. "Of course I've seen your movies, man," Strahan said lightly, flashing the easy smile that usually charmed guests into relaxing. "I'm just saying, from an audience perspective, when people think of Denzel Washington, they think serious, intense guy. Maybe it's time to shake things up a bit." The air in the studio shifted immediately. "Shake things up," Denzel repeated slowly, each syllable weighted with a quiet, gathering pressure. Anyone who understood Denzel, even a little, knew that the quieter his voice became, the more dangerous the atmosphere grew. "And what would you suggest I do to, as you put it, shake things up?" Strahan shrugged carelessly, as if he were discussing weather or football scores. "I don't know. Maybe try some comedy. Do a romantic comedy or something. Show people you can be funny. Loosen up a little bit." The tone was unmistakably condescending now. What had begun as a clumsy comment was evolving into something openly disrespectful. A ripple of unease passed through the audience. Camera operators exchanged looks. Producers stiffened behind their monitors. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something extraordinary, and not in the way morning television hoped for. Denzel's jaw tightened, just barely, but enough for millions of viewers and every camera in the room to notice. "Michael," he said calmly, "I've been acting since before you played your first professional football game. I've won 2 Academy Awards. I've been nominated for 10. I've performed on Broadway. I've acted, produced, and directed films that have earned critical acclaim and commercial success. So tell me, what exactly are you trying to say? A sensible person would have backed down then. A wiser host would have apologized, pivoted, or at least changed the tone. But Strahan, perhaps fueled by ego, or perhaps terrified of losing control of the segment, made the worst possible choice. He doubled down. Hey, I'm not attacking you, he said defensively. I'm just having a conversation. This is what interviews are for, right? Asking tough questions. The phrase tough questions echoed in the studio like a dropped weight. Denzel stared at him for a long, silent moment in which the entire atmosphere thickened with tension. The audience stopped breathing. The crew froze. Tough questions, he repeated quietly. Michael, a tough question would be about my preparation process, about the current state of cinema, about directing, about themes in my work. His gaze sharpened. What you're doing is making assumptions about my career, based on what sounds like a surface-level understanding of my body of work. The blow landed. Strahan's smile wavered, a brief crack in the polished television facade, before he plastered it back on with professional desperation. Look, he said, I think you're taking this too seriously. We're just having a casual conversation. Casual, Denzel echoed. And the single word held more gravity than anything said before. He leaned forward slightly. So when you have actors on your show, this is your preparation. You just wing it, hope for the best. That hit harder than any direct insult ever could. It wasn't banter anymore. It was a piercing critique of Strahan's credibility, professionalism, and respect for his guests. Strahan laughed nervously. Come on, Denzel. You know that's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Michael? Denzel asked, voice like tempered steel. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you didn't bother to do any research at all about the man you're interviewing today. Silence, heavy, absolute. The morning show warmth had evaporated. This was no longer a light-hearted television segment. This was a reckoning, and millions were watching it unfold live. Strahan's face tensed. A flicker of worry raced across his features. He glanced toward the producers off camera. They stared back helplessly. There was nothing anyone could do now. The situation was far beyond rescuing. I did my research, Strahan said, but his words lacked conviction. Defensive, uncertain. I know about your career. Do you? Denzel asked softly. The simplicity made it devastating, because a few minutes ago you suggested I only play one type of character, which tells me either you've never truly watched my films, or you're choosing to ignore the diversity of my work for reasons I can't understand. The studio audience sat transfixed. Nobody moved, nobody whispered, nobody dared to interrupt. It felt like watching a masterclass in dignity and authority collide with unprepared arrogance. Camera operators had stopped fidgeting with equipment. They were simply watching, capturing every micro expression, every breath, every shift of posture. This was history in the making. Strahan tried one final pivot, grasping for control. Okay, he said with a forced smile. Let's start over. Let's talk about your new film. Denzel shook his head. No, Michael. The firmness of that single word echoed through the room. Let's not start over. Let's finish what we started. He leaned back in his chair, composed, centered, but undeniably in command. You wanted to have a conversation about my career, so let's have it, but let's base it on facts, not on whatever assumptions you walked in with today. The tension was now thick enough to feel physically. Strahan shifted uncomfortably, the confident, morning show host mask crumbling piece by piece. His posture changed, no longer relaxed, no longer in control. His ego, his assumptions, his lack of preparation. All of it was now exposed under the harshest spotlight imaginable, and Denzel Washington, calm as a storm's eye, waited for his answer.